Well, first of all, you need to understand that there are two types of austerity. Austerity by tax increases and austerity by public spending cuts. Public spending cuts can be had by reducing the perimeter of the government, trying to rationalize the government, trying to rationalize the number of layers we have in the administration. This is a big issue here in France. Maybe also trying to reduce the number of subsidies given to the various special interest groups, subsidies which probably are not in the public interest. Then on the other side, you have the austerity by increasing taxes, and that's obviously what the government here in France chose. I don't think it's a good idea, but so we have two types of austerity, and it turns out that the government managed to make people angry, and two types of people angry. People on the left who were expecting more social gifts, let's call it like that, from the government, especially from the man who said he was against austerity during his presidential campaign. And they were probably disappointed by the austerity that President Hollande is now implementing. And then we have people on the right which are very disappointed by the austerity by tax increases because they have to pay more taxes. And that's especially the case of entrepreneurs, also probably small, medium companies and big companies, which all this explains the lack of popularity of Francois Hollande. But I don't think he will shift away from this austerity measures. First of all, because the budget is now voted in the National Assembly. Some concessions were made to the entrepreneurs. Actually, when the budget for next year was presented by the government late September 2012, a group of entrepreneurs called the Pigeons made it very clear that they were very angry at the new tax dispositions that would actually hurt their income and would actually hurt wealth creation and business creation. So the government sort of listened to them and tried to accommodate and compensate, but at the price of making tax law even more complicated. Well, I don't think that's possible, first of all, because of the already high level of public spending that we have in this country, 56% of GDP, which is pretty high compared to other countries, even though we have a pretty big social security system. But we also have a government that's very inefficient, especially due to the decentralization that we have in this country, which is a decentralization without accountability, which is the worst system you can think of. Decentralization is good, but if you make decision makers at each level of the different layers accountable, if you don't do that, you can be sure that it's going to produce a mess, which is actually the case in France. The level of tax pressure is pretty high too. It's actually going to jump to more than 46% next year with the new budget, which is pretty high. And not only is it high, but taxation in France is also very complicated, which makes the business environment illegible, and the incentive for entrepreneurs and businessmen is frankly to leave the country and go away. Not only because taxes are high, but because taxes are complicated, because they change all the time. So we have this regime uncertainty, which is very very bad for business. So I think that the effect of this will be very bad on economic growth, and I'm much less optimistic than various public institutions such as the IMF or the French government. And I think, like some private institutions like Natixis Bank, that economic growth will actually decline big time next year in France. And this is not good news. Given that France chose austerity by increasing taxes, this will no doubt generate, just like in other countries, generate recession. And this is very bad news for Europe, because remember that France is the second big player in Europe, and it has a major role to play in the rescue funds. So if France goes down, it means that it will not be a rescuer anymore. It will probably lose its ratings, and it will probably become a country to be rescued, which is not exactly good news for Germany. That's probably why Germans have recently slowed down in their demands in terms of more austerity, because they realize that too much austerity is bad for growth. But again, it depends on which type of austerity we're talking about. Here we have, in France, we have the key to the future of the euro. If France goes down, there's no way that Germany can bear all the cost, all the burden of Europe alone. And maybe this will mean the end of the euro.